Now, in place of Hello, Do You Hear Us, a special edition of the Channel 4 News with comment and information on the latest developments in the Gulf.
Hello, welcome to this Channel 4 News special on the Gulf War. Since the war started, we've been on the air around midnight from Monday to Friday. This is the first time, though, we've started on a Sunday night. 23 hours after the all-out ground offensive started, quite a lot of details are now clear. We'll bring you the latest developments and we'll discuss and analyse what we know and try to figure out the consequences of the dramatic events of this, the 39th day of the conflict. Amid the pictures from the front, this sums up pretty well what the Allies have claimed: a long, straggling line of Iraqi prisoners, some of 6,500 captured after coalition forces had stormed into Kuwait and southern Iraq. General Norman Schwarzkopf, the Allied commander, declared that all initial objectives had been achieved. However, he didn't specify what they were. The Allies are severely restricting the flow of information. He did say both resistance and casualties had been light. It was quickly emphasized by others, including the Prime Minister here, that the fighting could become much more difficult soon. The Iraqi soldiers encountered so far haven't been of stern stuff. There's been little contact so far with the formidable Republican Guard. The only information on casualties comes from Pentagon sources who say 11 American soldiers have been killed. President Bush's spokesman has just said that the White House's overall conclusion is that the whole operation so far has been very successful. Iraq, defiant as ever, declared the Allies had sustained heavy losses. The position now of Iraq, its leader Saddam Hussein, whether America has a clear idea of where the war's taking the coalition and the Middle East at large, these are matters we'll look at with the following guests. Dr. Keith Hampson, Conservative MP and formerly an officer of the Backbench Defence Committee. General Sir Anthony Farrah-Hockley, once Commander-in-Chief of Allied Forces Northern Europe, here to unravel the military comings and goings for us. Ephraim Karsh, who's on the left-hand side, there's just completed a biography of Saddam Hussein. And Paul Foote, a controversial columnist who's made it clear he's against the whole affair right from the start. And Dilip Hero? No, that's not Dilip Hero, that's Keith Hampson, who we've already seen. I wonder if we'll be able to see Dilip Hero. He's with me, I can assure everybody. Dilip Hero is here. He's an author of a book about Iraq's war with Iran, who's now writing another about this one. That's him. Good, we've spotted him. He's here. And our own diplomatic editor, Nick Gowing, definitely here. He joins us too. It had always been planned that Arab forces should be among the first to punch their way into occupied Kuwait, symbolically stressing this is the coalition and not America against Iraq. Sandy Gall and his ITN team were the first and so far the only British journalist to enter occupied Kuwait as they followed Saudi forces across the border. With Sandy Gall in Kuwait were Michael Gillings, the producer, and the cameraman Steve Harrow. Here's their report.
At dawn this morning, Saudi troops started moving across the desert on their mission to liberate Kuwait. Hundreds of tanks and armored personnel carriers, their crews raring to go, headed for the Kuwaiti border, apparently without a care in the world. Artillery and rocket launchers hammered the Iraqi defenses. Saudi armor moving across the desert on the first day of the ground offensive towards Kuwait. Just a few hundred yards up there is the berm, the big SAM defenses put up by the Iraqis. They've smashed a way through that and they're on their way now. Saddam Hussein's much vaunted berm, a defensive barrier of sand bridges and ditches, turned out to be an anticlimax. There was no flaming oil as threatened by Saddam, no Iraqi resistance. This was the historic moment as the great army of Saudi tanks and armored personnel carriers ground their way onto Kuwaiti soil and fanned out across the desert. One Saudi soldier's views about Saddam seem to be typical.
We will fight him, we will kill him, we will destroy his army and his force.
The operation went like clockwork, the armoured columns following a prearranged plan, advancing on a broad front without meeting any resistance for several miles. They passed a litter of empty shell cases and shortly afterwards a shattered heavy artillery piece. Then they crossed the highway and rolled off across the desert again. An empty Iraqi position and Saudi armour in the Kuwaiti desert. Now they're moving forward in the direction of Kuwait City. 10 or 15 miles inside Kuwait, the lead Saudi column captured their first Iraqi prisoners. A white flag flew from the top of a ridge. One soldier held out a leaflet calling on Iraqi troops to surrender. Another, slightly wounded, kissed one of his captors in relief.
The Iraqis most of them was very nice people, but the little of them, they said to us, there is no guns with them, there is no bombs, there is nothing with them, but we find it with them. So we just take them to the caravans and take them to the in the back.
Several had been hurt in the brief battle that preceded their capture. Disarmed and their hands bound, they were led off to captivity. Most of them seemed to be glad it was all over. At least they were alive and had managed to avoid what Saddam boasted would be the mother of all battles.
Sandy Gall reporting, and we should say that his report, like all those from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf area, certain operational details might have been omitted for reasons of military security. And one other item of news just come in. The Allied forces now say that 10,000 prisoners, Iraqi prisoners, have been taken. Now we'll look at the details, or what we can make out of the details of military things in a minute. I want to sort of keep this a bit broad just for a moment. Keith Hampson, first of all. It seems to have been one of those days when everyone said it's gone extremely well. We did hear that, though, didn't we? First day of the air campaign, and we learnt to take things a little bit more steadily afterwards.
Well, I think that's true. One has to be somewhat cautious. It has, as Sandy Gall said, gone like clockwork at the moment. But, of course, the Republican Guard are still there. We're not quite sure, I would imagine, how heavily they've been bombarded. And, of course, when you get into Kuwait City, is it going to be a house-to-house fight? That would be quite difficult, I think, and possibly heavy casualties. Booby traps have probably been put all over the place, in the oil fields as well as in the city. So it could certainly, as John Major said, get fierce.
Dilip Hero, those prisoners we saw, the point's been made, and I expect will be made by a military man again, these were not soldiers of any great merit as soldiers anyway. Why would the Iraqis have put those sort of people in that sort of position, do you think?
I think very difficult. I mean, one can't actually judge exactly what, so many units, exactly who has done what and so on. But I think, again, as you said, one has to look at the broad picture. And the broad picture is that, let's just, you mentioned yourself, what happened, the air campaign started, 17th of January. I remember exactly after 12 hours, there was a press conference given by the same gentleman, Mr. Schwarzkopf, and you could have run the same tape, what he said, exactly the same thing. Having said everything has gone smoothly, fantastically. But I issue a caution against being overly optimistic. You could have run the same tape, you would have got into a Guinness Book of Records, for fooling the public. So I think that, one has to be cautious about it. Now, going by the U.S. reports themselves, that there are 540,000 Iraqi soldiers in Kuwait. Now, if we allow for the attrition, all the bombing, etc., I expect there are still 450,000 Iraqi troops in Kuwait. And if this statement is true, or every statement coming from the MOD or the Pentagon has to be taken with a huge pinch of salt. If they have taken out 10,000, that still leaves 440,000 troops still there. So let's see how it goes.
All right, thank you very much, Dilip Hero. We'll continue with this in just a moment. But now, at midnight, we'll take a look at the headlines from the Gulf. 23 hours into the Allies' ground attack, the commander in the Gulf, General Norman Schwarzkopf, claimed dramatic success in the land offensive. He has reported light resistance and remarkably light Allied casualties. Only 11 US servicemen are so far reported dead. Military sources say that over 10,000 Iraqis have been taken prisoner, but the Americans emphasize the war is only in its early stages. The Iraqis claim they were repelling the attacks and had inflicted heavy losses on the Allies. Now then, Paul Foot, do you share well, we've had a bit of, with caution, I think, from Keith Hampson, scepticism from Dilip Hero. What about you? Where do you sit in this?
Well, I sit really in total horror at the whole escapade. I mean, I'm utterly opposed to the war. I think it's complete nonsense from start to finish. I think that none of us should be involved in it. There shouldn't ever have been a war there, and therefore when, for instance, Keith Hampson says that it's all going like clockwork, I'm inclined to think of the 40,000 perhaps that have already died, 20,000 troops according to the Allied claims, and at least 20,000 civilians. That's probably putting it at its very lowest. I suppose that's going like clockwork, and I don't know how much more we're going to have clockwork deaths of that kind, but the whole thing is quite grotesque, and for no purpose whatsoever. It's not a just war at all. It's an entirely unjust war, entirely unjustified in every way, and every death is quite unnecessary in my view.
Come back later, I'm sure, to sort of details of the way, why you feel that and the things that you feel. Just on this business of the way the facts have been presented this time, one does sense that people are a little bit more cautious this time about what they say, not to get people's hopes up. How do you as a journalist read the way things are being announced and or held back indeed in this case?
Well, I think that pretty well everything we hear is lies. I mean, I think really that everybody admits that. I think they're quite frank about it. It's the propaganda is part of the war. People have to believe things in order for the war to be successful, and whichever side you're on, they simply tell you a lot of lies. I think both sides are telling lies. I don't think you get any more truth out of what our side is saying or what the Allied side is saying than you have on what the Iraqis are saying. I think that they say things in order to assist the military effort, and indeed what you're obliged to say after every report, which is that some things have been left out for military security. That said, if it's something on the Allied side, if it's something on the Iraqi side, you say this is subject to Iraqi censorship. The truth is that both sides are subject to censorship, because the old cliche, the first casualty in any war is truth, and therefore I don't go along with any of this. You know, it's all sitting around every midnight. You have people sitting around saying, well, people suddenly become military experts who know about the strength of armour and what they think is going to happen here and what they think is going to happen there. I have no idea, and I certainly don't think we can base anything on what we hear in terms of the numbers of prisoners of war, the numbers of dead. The other day we heard that a little damage had been caused to an American cruiser because of some mine, and then we found the cruiser had to go back because it was so badly hit, and then we read of an oil slick, and there wasn't an oil slick, it was some other oil slick that they'd taken pictures of. And so I think for journalism, I think the whole thing is quite disastrous, because there's no truth in anything that we hear, and therefore we aren't allowed to report the facts. Indeed, in order to report what are not facts, we have to dress up in battle dress, apparently, from Sandy Gall's ridiculous appearance there a few minutes ago.
Eddie.
No, but I think if I can...
Can I just, one thing, I just wanted to say, we talk about this programme, I could just explain that we do have military experts. We think are military experts. So those people who are not, we make it pretty clear. We invite them to take part and ask their own questions on the military field.
We're all military experts now. We're all expected to be.
I've certainly not become any more expert in the time I've been doing this programme. Keith Hampson, I'll pick up one thing with you. Paul Foot says we're told lies.